In 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Another edition of the Great Lakes Divide, and finally a couple of games to talk about with Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. It's brought to you each and every time by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. The sounds, the music you hear coming in, Heather Frary has provided for us, and our theme music going out, same thing. They are located in the Rio Town Marketplace. We appreciate Heather's support. We appreciate you listening to the Great Lakes Divide podcast. After week one of action, Michigan State taking out Tulsa 28-7, the final score there, and Michigan victorious over Middle Tennessee State by a final of 40-21. We'll tackle the Spartans first because, of course, that game happened initially on Friday night, and Michigan just last night. Tom Crawford on about 5 hours of sleep, having been down in Ann Arbor. Tom, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I got home at 2 in the morning, I don't know, about 1:45, and then watched a little USC and Fresno State. Yeah. How sick am I to watch the end of that game? But no, I'm ready and roaring to go. But kind of a couple of, let's call them quirky wins, maybe sluggish wins, but W is just the same, and move on. Both teams move on at 1-0.
Typical openers, I guess you could say, and that was the theme of the night for Mark D'Antonio and Michigan State. We've got sound for you from both post-game press conferences. We'll get to in just a little bit. But Tom, I'll offer my initial thoughts on Michigan State. We were talking before we went to the recording here about how maybe the offense, there are even more problems than originally anticipated carrying over from last season, but that defense for the Spartans picking up right where it left off, perhaps taking another step forward. Kenny Willekes, an absolute beast, forcing the issue, making plays. Raekwon Williams knocks the ball loose. Kenny recovers it for a fumble. He makes a couple of other big plays, sacks, etc. He did have one that he beat himself up for, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. A roughing the passer penalty toward the end of the first half that resulted in the only score for Tulsa. But for that play, Tom, the Spartans very well could have shut Tulsa out, and that was just a dominating performance.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know the Michigan State fans were frustrated with the offense, and the Boo Birds were coming out, and I think there was a hangover from the Rutgers game, but the defense is unfreaking believable. I mean, I'll go old man alert here. Kenny Willekes is like Bubba Smith. I go back to the 60s when I was 10 years old when you had a defensive and that was that dominant, who could dominate a game and blow up a play. He's an amazing player. He's a first-round draft pick. He's just got a great future ahead of him, I think.
Both he and Joe Bacci leading the way with 7 tackles apiece. So many tackles for loss. Antoine Simmons, our guy.
We talked about it
from Ann Arbor.
Did we call that? That's pointing out to right center field, man. We crushed it.
And that was a high level difficulty interception too.
Big time. Yeah, he's the guy. There's so much talent around him. And high tide, raises all ships.
Yeah,
he's a very good football player. But I think he the other players make him better, and he frees him up to do his athletic things. And he could have a really, really good year for Michigan State.
Focusing on the positives now, because there's plenty to break down. As Tom mentioned, the Boo Birds were out at Spartan Stadium. Why? We'll get to momentarily, but 3 forced turnovers, 2 fumbles lost by Tulsa, 2 really bad snaps that went over the head of the quarterback. Michigan State in position to take advantage. The interception by Simmons we talked about. There was also a blocked punt. So you talk about game-changing plays, Tom, and what the defense can do for the Spartans, what the special teams can do, because Matt Coughlin made all 4 of his field goals. Yeah. Jake Hartbarger was pitting them deep with punts and the blocked punt. Everything you could do, defense, special teams, Michigan State did to win.
Well, people get tired of me saying this, but a great defense and solid, really, really good special teams is going to keep them in every one of those 12 games. I don't care who they're playing. They will be in every game. They may not win every game, but when you have those 2 variables right there, if you just get the offense from, get them a little bit more productive. But, I'm telling you what, though, Michigan State, kind of got some benefit offensively, with Tulsa had the stupid penalties on that first drive and set them up.
Yeah.
And so if that had not happened, it might have been a tighter game that first drive. Michigan State had their offense going, but the defense was just so consistent all the way through. It's like, this reminded me, Ryan, of the 2013 Open. Remember the Western Michigan game, I think it was, which was a really, really good season. And I keep going back to that comparison with the 19 season and the 13 season. was that let's just, to heck with Michigan State's offense, let's just watch them play football or on defense, and something good's going to happen.
One interesting quote from Kenny Willikis, and it was our mutual acquaintance Rico Beard that I think asked him about the fact that I believe it was their leading rusher, Tulsa's Shamari Brooks, who came in saying he was going to lay down 200 yards rushing. Corey Taylor, the other running back. These guys combined for 13 carries and -1 yards. Now, in college football, it's different than the pros because sack yardage lost by quarterbacks counts against the rushing total.
Yeah.
That being said, -73 yards rushing. And here's what Kenny had to say about kind of the bravado coming in from Tulsa and their running game and what the Spartans had to say and do about it. So this is a record that goes back. I saw it on ESPN, Tom. I think it had been since 2000. Mississippi State held a team to a larger negative number rushing. But even that being said, historically for MSU, the way they were able to just dominate run defense, shut that area down. I mean, tell us a little bit more about the history of that and why in today's game the run defense for Michigan State being as good as it is, why that's so important.
Well, because to win in college football, you still have to run the football. I mean, we've had coaches talk about that all last week, including Mark D'Antonio. You got to run the football. And so if you shut down the running game, man, you are really going to make it difficult for the other team's offense and where they're relying on the passing game. And this is why I see the pattern with Michigan State is forcing teams to be one-dimensional, as in throw the football. I think every team is going to have a difficult time running the football. The Panashuk brothers, I mean, these names are going to be household names. I think maybe, I don't know, who was the secondary guy? Josh Butler would get burned a couple times, maybe.
And he tweeted about that. He was taking responsibility, and my response to that was, that's the least of your problems right now. I mean, I'm glad that...
I know, but that shows you the standard that he has.
Right.
I mean, and he's owning his own mistake. I mean, when I look at that defense, Josh Butler getting beat a couple times was about the only thing that I can even poke at with Michigan State's defense.
And time of possession, a big part of that because Michigan State was able to get off the field. But for, again, that final drive in the first half where Tulsa got their lone score and touchdown, they really didn't do anything else. Michigan State had the ball for 36-plus minutes. Tulsa had it for just under 24, and it was all predicated on the tone that was set by the Spartan defense that was virtually flawless. With the possible exception of penalties, and we'll get to that in a moment, that was a big part of this. But a question I had for Mark D'Antonio was right out of the gate, what were we going to see that was different from the Dave Warner type offense with Brad Salem calling plays? And Coach D'Antonio was rather revealing about this because the one thing that stood out to me on that initial drive, which unfortunately in many ways was their best drive, it was aided by a 15-yard penalty on a hit out of bounds against Lewerke, was the pace of plays and how that would factor in. And here's what Coach D'Antonio had to say about that. Remarkable when you think about, Tom, in the D'Antonio era, it goes back to something you just said. He's more of an old school guy. He wants to establish the run. He wants time of possession. He wants drives that sustain, that take time off the clock. Yeah. However, he mentioned in today's game, you got to play with tempo. You got to play with pace. You got to keep the defense off balance. And that seemed to be at least the intent of that first drive.
Well, you have to because your opposition is taking advantage of, let's call it technology or modern football. So if you don't take advantage of it, you're hurting your own team. So you have to embrace it. But they can't run the football. I mean, Michigan State can't seemingly run the football. And if I'm a coach or a fan, whatever, of another team playing them, the comforting thing about playing Michigan State's offense is there's not the home run hitting fear guy on that team. You know what I mean? There's just not that guy who's going to take it to the distance from either from a running back slot or from a wide receiver getting, Felton Davis, or somebody getting behind somebody. I don't see that in that Michigan State team offensively, and I think that's going to really hamstrung Michigan State's offense, the fact that they don't have a home run hitter.
That's such a good point, Tom, and it evidences itself. If you just look at the numbers, Connor Hayward, 15 carries, 43 yards. That's not even 3 yards a carry.
Right.
Ladarius Jefferson on the backfield, 7 carries, 8 yards. He had one splash play, but that was on a short pass. And maybe that's the answer here, because I asked Brian Lewerke about the offense and the pace and how he felt about it and what was really holding them back. Drive after drive, we saw just something, they would shoot themselves in the foot.
Yep.
Here's what Brian had to say about what he thought of the offensive performance by Michigan State in Friday night's game. And that was the thing, Tom, the penalties. If you look at that.
Oh, my God, 14 of them. That's too many.
For 122 yards. And when you factor in, they had 122 yards of penalty yardage against and 108 yards rushing. More penalty yards than rushing yards. And like you said, they don't have running lanes. The interesting thing to me, too, was Coach D'Antonio, and he did this last year, too, he is more quick to blame the running backs not hitting lanes, not picking up blitzers or blocks, not seeing where the holes are supposed to go, than an offensive line, to me, that continues to immensely struggle.
That's a good point.
Well, I know that Cole Chewins is out and he's hurt, but he's not Flozell Adams. Jordan Reed, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, he was a turnstile at least 3 times in a game. This is against a 3-man front for Tulsa.
I noticed that.
Varied looks and blitzes, but just what your thoughts were on the offensive line in Michigan State on that side of the ball.
Oh, I think it's hugely problematic because, I mean, protection maybe might have been all right, but pass protection, but you got to be able to carve some holes. And the fact that you don't have that guy that's going to be able to get behind the defense, that's going to be a challenge. I mean, if I'm a Michigan State fan, I'm really concerned about that offense. I know it's game 1. I know the 14 penalties. It's like that's what happens. Everybody's sloppy early on. Michigan was sloppy, as we'll talk about later. But I don't see the personnel, Ryan, that can remedy this situation on this team right now. From what I know, it's just game 1, but I don't see that guy. Who's that guy? Who's that running back guy? Who's that Le'Veon Bell that you're gonna feel threatened about?
This is a game that should have been 42-7. It was 28-7. Let's break it down.
Field goals off those turnovers. 4 turnovers Tulsa committed in the first half.
4 field goals by Coughlin, and let's give him due credit. He hit a couple that were from 40 yards out.
He's a solid kicker.
But you're right.
Like that special team play.
Turning the field. Tom Izzo in basketball calls them turnover for touchdowns. They weren't getting touchdowns. They were getting short fields, the block punt, defense holding, good return, and they couldn't take advantage of a short field to turn those into points. They had 4 field goals for 12 points. They had a safety by the defense for 2 points. They had Kenny Willekes' defensive touchdown.
I know.
Tom, they scored 7 points offensively.
That's like 2013. That's a Western. You know what I mean? It was the same type of thing, but the defense was scoring the touchdowns. I'll tell you what. I know you were at the game. I'm watching on TV. The thing that saved the game for me was Tom Izzo in the booth with Tim. I'm serious.
Yeah,
I'm
his
serious.
presence.
His presence. I kid you not. I think he was only planning on being there a little bit, but the demand. I think the reception board was lighting up. Keep this guy on. He was really, really good and got me through the game because that offense was just painful to watch.
It was a lot of things, too. It was the inability to run the football. It was an offensive line that I saw a couple of clips, video-wise on Twitter, where on a particular play, every one of the 5 linemen for Michigan State were pushed back in space. They did not create separation. They did not get a push. They did not create a running lane. This offensive line is an absolute mess. I'm wondering when and if we see Devontae Dobbs. Does Chewins come back, and does that help a whole heck of a lot? And for Brian Lewerke, it seemed like he had a little bit of chemistry with Darrell Stewart, a couple passes there, but he was off target, overthrowing passes that were there. Cody White being one of those that just was a ghost in this game. Jalen Naylor didn't get really involved on offense. The best throw Lewerke had, he was under complete duress, and he hit Stewart with a shoulder throw. And
Stewart had a good game,
He did, but outside of that, Tom, it's just rhythm. Execution was the word that D'Antonio used. It's just completely out of sync, and it's like, hey, you don't want to overreact to game 1, but with what happened last season, this is what people were looking for. Changes on offense.
I know. It's like, listen, Michigan State fans are, they're not the worst fans in the world in terms of impatience. I think Michigan State fans are pretty patient fan base, and they're booing in game 1. Think about that for a second. They're winning the game. A lot of expectation going in. But the fact that your fan base was so frustrated, they were booing in the third quarter, I thought that's pretty compelling situation that went on there.
Couldn't sustain drives, couldn't finish drives. This is not a tough Tulsa defense. It makes you wonder. We'll see the improvement between week 1, week 2, and you hope that there's going to be a lot against Western Michigan, but man, there's a lot to be concerned about because, again, like you said, the lingering effect, we're talking 9-6 games from a year ago where the defense did its job and the offense just couldn't score. The defense, however, again, nearly pitching a shutout in this game. I asked both Joe Bacci and Kenny Willekes about that performance, about what they consider to be a perfect game for the defense and how close they were to achieving that against Tulsa. Here's what each of them had to say. So again, the themes, I don't think there was anything really, Tom, in this game that surprised me, for good or for bad. The defense being dominant, special teams being extremely solid, offense having all kinds of issues and problems. The one thing I'll leave people with, and I want to get your response to, is D'Antonio doubled, tripled down on the new method by which they're going to run this offense. Brad Salem is on the sideline, not up in the booth. They're calling plays. They're going in. They want to go with tempo. They want to go up speed. But in order to do that, Tom, what does that require? A lot more execution, concentration, smaller margin for error. Can Michigan State transform themselves into this type of up-tempo offense that Mark D'Antonio wants?
Well, and I think that Michigan ran in this too. I think there's going to be an adjustment to this. And you got Rocky Lombardi running down the field in these short yardage situations too. That's an element. I'm curious to know your opinion on that. I mean, it seems like there's going to be some growing pains, and I think that will get better. But we said, let's go back last week. We said, well, what's going to be our takeaway from the Tulsa game? Well, we're going to know. It's not necessarily that we're going to know that Michigan State's offense is back if they move the ball against Tulsa, because Tulsa's not that good. But we will know that they're going to have some problems if they can't move the ball against Tulsa. And so, in other words, a negative could be looming out there. We really can't validate a positive until they play a better team. Well, I think we got validation that this offense is not going to be very good.
We'll transition to Michigan in just a moment. One of the terms that we hear about Michigan that I really think has applied to Michigan State, speed in space.
Yeah.
And for Michigan State, how are they going to create that? The Rocky Lombardi thing I'll comment on. I like the element of adding him, sprinkling him in from time to time, but you can't telegraph it that when he comes in, it's short yardage, it's power running. You know, there's got to be a threat that he might throw the ball. And for MSU at this point, they need quick hitters, quick slants, screen passes that suck a defense in because your line's not blocking anyway. Mm-hmm. Set that up, run it downfield. You know, swing it out. There are things that Michigan State wants to do that they're just not going to be able to do, and that's power running between the tackles. We talked about Hayward, less than 3 yards per carry. He's not that type of back, and he needs better performance up front from the offensive line. I didn't see a lot of fullback sets either that I thought we were going to see with Rosenthal. Maybe an extra tight end. I mean, they've got to do something to augment, to supplement, to complement an offensive line that already out of the gate is struggling. And again, Michigan State will have a chance to try to correct some things. That'll be a Saturday night game on Big Ten Network, Western Michigan. It's a 7:30 start at Spartan Stadium. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the Michigan Wolverines and their win over the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders. Heather Frary, one of our good sponsors here from the Record Lounge, had a chance to visit with her for 5 great minutes. New location in Rio Town. Talked to her about that. Talked to her about her thoughts on the Michigan State win over Tulsa as well. And again, that final score, 28-7. Here's that conversation. And again, our thanks to Heather Frary and the Record Lounge sponsoring the Great Lakes Divide podcast. You're tuning in with Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. And after my attendance in East Lansing at the Spartans' 28-7 win over Tulsa, Tom did yeoman's work. He went down to Ann Arbor in the Big House for the opener against Middle Tennessee State. He was there into the wee morning hours, got back. We're recording this early on Sunday morning. A 40-21 win over Middle Tennessee. But Tom, I got to start here. First play of the game from scrimmage, Shea Patterson runs it for 15, fumbles the ball away, 4 plays later, MTSU's in the end zone. It's 7-0. What were you thinking?
Well, I mean, I wasn't on panic alert. I wasn't pacing around the press box, if that's what you're thinking, which probably people think I was doing. But it is Middle Tennessee State. But no, it was early on. I mean, Middle Tennessee State scored their touchdowns early on, with off turnovers. I mean, that's the only way they really could move the ball. But I knew Michigan would move the ball, and they did move the ball. But the biggest takeaway of this game was not so much a discouraging aspect, but a disappointing in himself, Shea Patterson, after the game. I mean, I remember every game last year. I mean, he's a pretty positive guy, upbeat, but he was down on himself. And I think maybe this Dylan McCaffrey, incorporating him into it, I don't know if that's lacing in his head as well. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing that he was incorporating the game, two at the same time. But I'm sure he'll work it out. But you can't turn the ball over. I did like the balance, though. Michigan has balance. They were about almost yard for yard in their 400-plus yards of offense. Was the fact that they throw the ball and run the ball pretty much equally. And in Zach Charbonnet, they found a freshman running back. He had 90 yards. I think he's going to be the guy.
Tom mentioned Shea's comments, and I noticed this too a year ago after the opening loss against Notre Dame. And of course, he was fresh to the program then in his first start. You like for a guy, a leader, a quarterback, to be his own worst critic, but here were Shea's comments about his own performance that Tom gathered last night. You can hear him right here. Tom, let's talk about this dual quarterback thing, because I'm picking up this program right here that you brought back.
I wish we had a camera for our listeners.
And just to describe for our podcast listeners, there's Shea Patterson there, and he's in his quarterback pose, and then right behind him, lurking
over his right shoulder, no less.
Almost like it's this threat that's coming from you. It's visual, but it's symbolic. And there's Dylan McCaffrey. Now, Tom, we're going to go back. We talked about this a little bit in our first podcast. The disaster that came from what I feel could have been another national championship caliber team when Tom Brady and Drew Henson were in a timeshare. Drew Henson was the golden boy. He was the chosen one. His dad was big time. Brighton High School. I remember it all well.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Brady's kind of this unknown kid from California, and they're working him in, and maybe he's better.
In his fifth year, though.
And Lloyd Carr couldn't decide, but the stability of Brian Griese in 1997 was an enormous factor as to why the Wolverines won the national title. They couldn't decide. I don't like, in general, in theory, the whole timeshare quarterback thing. And then the bizarre nature in which it happened. I want your comments on this. McCaffrey comes in, dual quarterback formations. He's lined up as a receiver. Just how did you read and react to that?
I can't stand that because I guess Dylan McCaffrey is a wildcat guy, but you're going to put him in the slot. I mean, what's your threat? Why do you put him on the field? I know Michigan did this one time in the Penn State game in '99 where Brady threw it to Drew Henson. I was kind of messing with that deep Penn State defense, and it worked one play. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't see that. Listen, Dylan McCaffrey's got 2 more years after this. Mm-hmm. I mean, incorporating him, have quality depth, but this whole thing, switching things out, I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not a Power 5 coach. I mean, I don't relative to those coaches in the world, I don't know squat diddly about football. I'm not a big fan. I'm with you on that. And I was trying to get a read from Shea on what was going on in his head. And I think he was in a funk more than I've ever seen him before. And he's happy they won the game and everything. But I think this whole Dylan thing is got to be in his head. I think it would be if I was him.
Well, there's the whole... And Jim Harbaugh was a big-time quarterback himself. He knows how this goes. You want to motivate a guy. I get the whole kind of fear versus security thing. You don't want a quarterback to get fat cat syndrome, but I don't think you worry about that with Shea Patterson's personality. He's not a guy that just settles for mediocrity, but again, like the cover of this program, if he feels McCaffrey's lurking there and there's some kind of debt or that it's owed to McCaffrey because like you said, he's got 2 years left, but if we don't play him, then he's going to sulk and maybe he'll transfer. There's that going on, I think, in the back of a lot of Michigan fans' minds. But what I saw from Shea Patterson after the fumble, a couple of brilliant, on-point touchdown passes, the chemistry that he had to Tarek Black, to Nico Collins, a couple of those strikes. I mean, he looked pretty good on those scoring strikes.
And that's what, and Jim Harbaugh talked about that, the checkdowns. I mean, he raved about that after the game. I mean, because And Jim, he defends his players. I mean, he doesn't throw his kids under the bus at all. And he's a glass half full kind of guy. And but I think what the bottom line on this is, Ryan, is this offense is a tough learn. It really is. I mean, and you can see some of the players are offensive play when they talk about it. Ben Bredesen kind of did this thing in the summer, kicking and screaming. Your offensive lineman, and then all of a sudden he's sold in. Then all of a sudden the light bulb goes on, and I think it's a hard learn, and I think Michigan will get better offensively moving forward, and I think Michigan State will the same way. I mean, because they're still doing this is an adjustment phase. This is a whole new format of how they're attacking the football.
Let's get to Jim Harbaugh's comments that Tom touched on there. Just about the offense, how they executed, Shea Patterson's performance. Here's what Coach Harbaugh had to say. It's interesting, too, to me, Tom, the parallel between the adjustments, the tweaks, the tempo that Mark D'Antonio is trying to establish with Brad Salem now calling plays, and the knowledge and I think the admission by Jim Harbaugh that they needed to change things up offensively. Josh Gaddis comes in. Your overall thoughts and feelings on how the game is being called for Michigan, the tempo and pace with which they're playing, and what the ultimate goal is to achieve and accomplish.
Well, I think it's a legitimate yield. Jim Harbaugh is yielding his offense to Josh Gaddis. And I mean, when you talk to the player, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, people, always going to say, oh, Harbaugh's he's making all the calls, blah, blah, blah. He is definitely yielding. And I think Josh Gaddis, I know people say, well, he doesn't have any experience calling the plays. He was so involved with the Alabama offense with Loxley. I think that's not going to be that big of an issue, and he'll overcome it. I think he's going to have a really, really good year as an OC, and he'll be some guy that after the end of this year, other schools are going to go after him. So this could be a one and done for Michigan.
It's in one way that's a nice problem to have because it shows that there would be success.
Yeah,
but that's the cost of success.
That's the cost of it. And and I don't know. And I'm here. Why do I borrow worries here and worry about the 2020? But what happens then next? You got to get somebody else to come in and incorporate that. Every OC has their own kind of signature, and is that next OC going to expect the same yield to him that Jim has given Josh Gaddis? These are long-term problems when you have a program the way Michigan has it.
Well, and you got to like the balance. Tom touched on this when we first got into the game here, the 40-21 win by Michigan over Middle Tennessee, 220 yards through the air, 233 yards on the ground. And Tom, credit where credit is due. This is why you count on Tom Crawford. Zach Charbonnet, 8 carries, 90 yards, including one big splash play for 41 yards. What do you like about him? Is there anything that was revealed in this game that you maybe anticipated coming in but was confirmed to you?
Well, and maybe I go back to the give me Anthony Thomas 1997 freshman year. I'll take that with 600 plus yards. This is going to be more than this. This could be an 800 to 1,000 yard rushing for Zach Charbonnet. And it was just talking to the players, Khalil Hudson in Chicago, about this freshman running back, and their eye. You can see the body language, the facial, reaction. Their eyes. Oh man, he's a dude. He's a dude. And Bredesen was saying the same thing. So I mean, it's pretty obvious. You have him and Christian Turner and True Wilson, who threw just a dynamite protection block on the Treat Black touchdown. I mean, these are. I think they're going to be all right at running back. Barring, obviously barring any injury, they got to stay healthy, and that's another discussion point in a second here. But I think that I think the running situation is going to be fine. It's just keeping everybody healthy and getting Donovan Peoples-Jones back into play. He was in a boot. Some people said it was a lingering thing before. I heard some rumblings that it was a rolled ankle just the other day. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I think he's going to be back in a couple of weeks, and when that happens, that arsenal through the air is going to be even better.
See, that's the thing, Tom. I mean, we talked about this. We see Black with the high caliber touchdown reception. He had 80 yards on 4 catches. Nico Collins with another great throw from Patterson. Sean McCune, tight end.
Yes.
You know that the Michigan offense, no matter how this is going to sort out, when you have a tight end that's a weapon like McCune, this is a guy that diversifies the attack and makes it very difficult to guard. But you just add Donovan Peoples-Jones to that whole mix, and it takes it up another level. He's in a boot. we talked about, what was the lingering injury concern? I asked you about that in the first podcast. It was very mysterious. You're talking a couple weeks. You're hoping he comes back for that Wisconsin game, but better safe than sorry. But what is this Michigan offense without DPJ, and then what is it to you with him?
Well, I'll tell you what. Not to settle here, but I mean, if Tariq Black stays healthy, I mean, I'll take that right now. I mean, Tariq Black, he went off the field early on, and supposedly there was an ankle roll, but then he was back walking around. I tell you what, football is such a vulnerable game. When you are, when you're kind of, let's say, predisposed to injuries, it's like your body is one big high ankle sprain. You know what I mean? It's like if you're one of those guys that gets hurt, it's such a physical sport and a physically vulnerable sport at wide receiver. These racehorse athletes, getting hit. You start to wonder, you can't have enough great players. You really can't, because the injury bug, and Michigan State fans can attest to this, it really leaves your program vulnerable.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I saw Twitter kind of lighting up about this topic. One was the Dylan McCaffrey aspect, having both on the field and people criticizing that. But another was clocking the football with 2 timeouts in your pocket. Take us through what happened there.
Clocking the oh, yeah. I couldn't figure it out at all. I don't know. I mean, it was just another one of those things, like, I'm not fully confident that everything is pulled together on this offense. I mean, I think it's just going to some of the decision making. There still seems to be a little cluster, what going on.
Yeah.
I mean, and I noticed that. I mean, I'm a big sideline watcher guy, and sometimes I wonder if they got their F together. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to me, again, this team, I feel this will ride or die with the command and control that Shea Patterson has on this offense. You said he could be in New York as a Heisman candidate. I'm not going to sell that short. I think that's possible. But What is the hesitation, if any, that Jim Harbaugh has with Shea Patterson? Why? What is that?
What's the hesitation of why are you pulling him off and putting Dylan in?
That's that, and just not going, I'm all in, I'm full in, Shea Patterson's our guy.
I just think that I think the philosophy is that there's so much arsenal there, you try to utilize it and maybe give the defense another concern, if you will, adjust to a new quarterback. But I think your old offense has to, the cadence and everything, always worry about that issue. I don't know. I think it's too early to tell how this is going to play out. I think with a learning curve on this offense, I think Shea will be dynamite moving forward. I think he's such a competitive guy. This dude works his ass off in the quarterback room. I mean, his teammates will tell you that. I mean, he's a leader through and through, and I think he's going to be just fine. One of those situations, but I mean, I don't know why there's this compelling need to play both quarterbacks, and I think what our problem is for Michigan fans, we're just all of a sudden we default back. We're so historical driven, looking at back what happened in the Michigan law. Oh, this is 1999 all over again. Here we go again. Yeah. You know what? 1999, they ended up 5th in the nation.
They did.
I mean that, and they beat Alabama in the Orange Bowl. Mm-hmm. Okay, granted they didn't win the Big Ten championship, but that was one hell of a team. And so, is that so bad to have a top 5 team?
Michigan defensively, let's focus on that for a moment. And just what, if anything, you're able to gather from an opponent like Middle Tennessee that couldn't run the football. Wolverines hold them to 67 yards on the ground. They had the early touchdown, but that was on a short field because of the fumble. Overall, your thoughts, the performance by the Wolverine defense?
I was really I guess I was surprising. I was surprised that it was going to be as good. I mean, was I being critical of Don Brown? Was I still thinking of that 103 points that they just served up in the last 2 games? But they were creative. Don Brown's got Aiden Hutchinson, and and Mike Dana, the transfer from Central. He's got some weird formations where he's got 3 defensive ends lined up in the middle of the line. He's mixing and matching. He's got a lot of personnel. Cleek Hudson, who's a Viper, he's out there at free safety. He's got his athletes. He tries to get his 7 best athletes on the field of the 11 a lot of the time. he's looking at that. It's almost like backyard football, but he wants athleticism out there. I thought that was really compelling. I think Vincent Gray, who's playing that left corner, he played really well, and as far as coming back into play and stepping up. And so I thought overall it was a pretty good performance. And you had Mozzie Smith in there, a freshman who played well, and Chris Hinton. You saw some names that Michigan fans haven't seen, and a lot of depth, a lot of talent. Actually, I was surprisingly happy with the defense.
Tom mentioned it, and if there's one thing that he appreciates, it's legacies at Michigan, and Aiden Hutchinson is certainly one of those with his dad, Chris. And Tom got a question in about that, and a very interesting response from Aiden here, and the good-natured jabbing between him and his father. So the weapons on defense, Tom, you mentioned it in our first podcast, concern about Khaleke Hudson, and could he return to form? Could he play all out, 100 miles an hour, the way they saw him maybe a couple years ago? Well, he led the team with 8 tackles, 6 of them solo, got a quarterback hurry in there as well. How'd you feel about Hudson's performance?
I knew he was going to play well, just because he was a little frustrated with himself last year. He had the targeting calls last year, and he kind of harnessed himself and got in a funk. He was just all over the place. As I mentioned, Don Brown's got him all over the field. He's very athletic. In fact, I talked to his parents walking out after the game. They were really happy with his performance. And so it's just, he's one of several great athletes on that defense. I think the defense is going to get better as the season moves on, but they're going to have to deal with physicality offensive lines as well. I mean, that Wisconsin team, we saw them against South Florida. I really don't know how good South Florida is, but they pounded them down in Tampa, and that's the big challenge coming up on September 21st after the bye week.
So Michigan gets the win, 40-21 over Middle Tennessee. Tom talks about Wisconsin. They'll have a bye week after next weekend's game against Army, which I think with the DPJ injury, some of the uncertainty on offense, got to go to Madison. That's not going to be an easy task. What needs to happen? We'll get into a full preview coming up midweek, Tom, but between game 1 and game 2 against an Army team has a vaunted rushing attack, what do you want to see from these Wolverines as they do? That's their primer game for Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, obviously I don't want to see the turnovers that took place. I mean, that's, being Uncle Obvious there, but just continue to have that balance. I think that will be key. Army played Rice at home, and Army is one of those teams that they probably, I would say, they play the level of their opponent.
Yeah,
don't you think?
Yeah, they muck it up.
Yeah, they muck it up. Even muck it up against. I'm not saying Rice is a bad team, but that's not a juggernaut. They beat them 14-7.
Mm-hmm.
I think Michigan's got to, just open things up and get in that fast pace, and Shea's got to take care of the football. I think they'll be just fine. And then they have the bye week, which is ironic when I looked at that schedule. Like, damn, a bye week, third week. All of a sudden, Northwestern's, they're happy about their bye week, week 2. They're all banged up. And they lost to Stanford. They lost to some key players. Bye weeks can be vital anytime. So I think it sets up really, really good schedule-wise. The fact they have the bye week, week number 3, they'll get things going, take care of the football. They might, Army will muck it up probably next week at noon, but I think Michigan will win fairly comfortably, and I think they'll execute a lot better offensively.
One final thing I want to say is that Tom and I were both right. The underdogs, Middle Tennessee and Tulsa, both covered the spread against Michigan and Michigan State. Those numbers were too big. Beware of the big point spreads and those backdoor covers.
Who would bet on those kind of? I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Degenerate gamblers. Not you and me, apparently, but we made the right call.
34 points. I mean, with the 22 for Michigan State, my first reaction is Michigan State going to score 22 points?
Barely.
To cover. And if they didn't have the turnovers, they probably, have those four field goals or whatever.
There it is.
When it got done.
So upcoming this midweek, we will preview Michigan and Army. As Tom said, that's a noon start on Fox. He will be there in attendance. Michigan State has Western Michigan coming to town. The Broncos, a 7:30 start time Saturday night, televised on Big Ten Network. Wolverines once again winners, 40-21 over Middle Tennessee. And Michigan State, with a lot of help from their defense and special teams, beats Tulsa 28-7. That'll do it for us from here for now. For Tom Crawford, I'm Ryan Schuling. Again, the sounds that you hear going out of this podcast are brought to you by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Our thanks to our good friend Heather Ferrari for joining us, giving us a little bit of a preview of what's to come in the Rio Town marketplace at the Record Lounge. If you're ever in East Lansing, check them out. All the latest and greatest new releases along with the all-time greats as well. The Record Lounge in Rio Town. We'll talk to you later this week on the Great Lakes Divide.